Let me ask you something. Just real talk for a second. Have you ever felt like you're doing everything you were told to do, and yet somehow you still feel off? Like you're giving more, trying harder, being nicer, more understanding, more patient, yet the respect, confidence, and control you want just aren't there, and nobody really explains why. See, no one sits men down and says this out loud anymore, but a lot of guys today feel disconnected from their own power, not because they're weak, not because they're broken, but because they were taught, quietly over time, to hand their power away without even realizing it. And here's the controversial part. Most men don't lose power because of bad luck, bad relationships, or even rejection. They lose it because they abandon themselves. They stop trusting their instincts. They trade self-respect for approval. They start measuring their worth through other people's reactions instead of their own standards. I'm not here to blame anyone. This isn't about attacking women, society, or relationships. This is about you, about how power actually works, and how easily it slips away when you're not paying attention. Power isn't about control. It's not about dominance, and it's definitely not about anger or resentment. Real power is internal. It's the ability to stand on your own 2 feet emotionally, to make decisions without fear of being abandoned, judged, or rejected, to know who you are even when no one's clapping for you. The uncomfortable truth is this: when a man doesn't have a clear sense of self, he starts outsourcing his confidence. He looks for validation. He overexplains. He overgives. And slowly, without noticing, he becomes reactive instead of grounded. This video isn't about becoming cold, distant, or alpha in some cartoonish way. It's about remembering something most men were never taught: how to choose themselves without guilt, how to set boundaries without anger, and how to build a sense of power that doesn't depend on anyone else's behavior. If you've ever felt like you're losing yourself trying to be good enough, stay with me. Because taking your power back starts with understanding where you gave it away in the first place. 1. Why chasing approval is the fastest way men lose power. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're sitting next to me right now, coffee in hand, and I ask you a simple question. When was the last time you made a decision without worrying how someone else would react? Not how they'd feel, not whether they'd approve, just what you genuinely wanted to do. If that question makes you pause, you're not alone. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men never hear. The moment you start chasing approval, you quietly hand over your power. And what makes this so dangerous is that it doesn't feel like weakness at first. It feels like being respectful, considerate, mature. But over time, it turns into something else entirely. Approval seeking teaches a man to live on the outside of himself. Think about how this usually starts. You want to be liked. You want to be seen as a good guy. You don't want conflict. So you adjust your words. You soften your opinions. You delay decisions. You second guess your instincts. Little by little, your confidence stops coming from within and starts coming from reactions. Smiles, reassurance, praise, attention. That's the trap. When your sense of worth depends on how others respond, you stop leading your own life. You become reactive. You wait for signals. You look for permission. And the more you do this, the harder it becomes to feel grounded or respected by others or by yourself. Here's what most men don't realize. People don't respect someone who needs approval. Not because approval is bad, but because neediness is visible. It shows up in over-explaining, in trying too hard to be understood, in saying yes when you mean no, in giving more than you actually want to give. And the irony? The more approval you chase, the less powerful you feel, the less certain you become, the more frustrated and confused you get, because you're doing everything right, yet something still feels off. This doesn't mean you should stop caring about people. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that your values should guide you, not other people's reactions. When approval becomes the goal, your standards disappear. And without standards, a man loses direction. Real confidence works the opposite way. It starts internally. You decide who you are, you decide what you tolerate, You decide what matters. And then, here's the key. You let the world respond however it wants. That's where power lives. A man who doesn't chase approval doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. He doesn't rush to explain himself. He doesn't bargain for respect. He knows that not everyone will agree with him, and he's okay with that. That calm certainty is felt immediately. And no, this isn't about being cold or arrogant, it's about self-trust. When you trust yourself, you don't need constant validation. You don't need reassurance to move forward. You act from clarity instead of fear. If you've ever felt drained, overlooked, or quietly resentful, this is often where it begins. Approval seeking looks harmless, but it slowly teaches you to abandon your own needs. And the moment you stop choosing yourself, your power starts slipping away. The first step to taking it back isn't doing more, it's needing less permission to be who you already are. 2. How men are taught to ignore their own needs and why that backfires. Let me say this in a way that hits close to home. A lot of men don't feel powerless because they lack strength. They feel powerless because they've been trained to dismiss themselves. And the craziest part? Most of the time, they think that's what being mature or strong actually looks like. Think about it. From an early age, men are praised for pushing through discomfort. Don't complain. Be the bigger person. Just deal with it. On the surface, that sounds like discipline, but over time, that message quietly mutates into something unhealthy. Your needs don't matter as much as keeping the peace. So men learn to swallow frustration, to minimize disappointment, to downplay emotional exhaustion. They convince themselves it's normal to feel drained, disconnected, or unfulfilled as long as they're being responsible and not rocking the boat. Here's the controversial truth. Ignoring your needs doesn't make you strong, it makes you numb. When a man consistently ignores what he needs, rest, clarity, respect, space, purpose, those needs don't disappear. They stack up. And eventually, they come out sideways, through irritation, through emotional shutdown, through sudden anger that feels like it came out of nowhere. This is where things start to backfire. A man who doesn't listen to himself becomes disconnected from his own internal compass. He starts making decisions based on pressure instead of alignment. He stays in situations longer than he should. He overcommits. He gives when he's empty. And slowly, he loses touch with who he actually is. The dangerous part is that this self-neglect often gets rewarded at first. People may see you as reliable, easygoing, low maintenance, but inside, something is eroding. Your sense of agency, your sense of choice, your sense of power. And here's what no one warns men about. Resentment grows fastest where needs go unspoken. When you ignore yourself long enough, you start feeling unseen, even when no one is intentionally overlooking you. That quiet resentment can turn into bitterness, withdrawal, or a sudden desire to burn everything down. Not because you're unreasonable, but because you've been abandoning yourself for too long. Reclaiming power starts with a mindset shift. Your needs are not inconveniences, they are signals. Needing space doesn't make you selfish. Needing clarity doesn't make you demanding. Needing respect doesn't make you difficult. These are basic requirements for a grounded, self-respecting life. When you acknowledge them early, you prevent emotional overload later. Strong men don't ignore themselves. They manage themselves. That means checking in, asking, am I actually okay with this? Do I want this, or am I just avoiding discomfort? Am I choosing this freely, or out of fear of conflict or rejection? The moment you start answering those questions honestly, something shifts. You stop operating on autopilot. You stop sacrificing yourself for approval. You start making choices that align with your energy and values. And that alignment, that's power. When a man honors his own needs, he becomes calmer, clearer, and more decisive. He doesn't need to force anything. He doesn't explode later because he handled things early. He moves through life with a quiet authority that comes from self-respect. Ignoring yourself might feel noble in the short term, but it always costs you in the long run. Taking your power back begins when you finally decide to listen. 3. The hidden cost of being too nice and overavailable. Let's talk about something a lot of men feel but rarely say out loud. Being nice can slowly drain the life out of you, and not because kindness is bad, but because overavailability quietly teaches you to disappear. Most men don't become overly nice on purpose. It happens gradually. You start prioritizing harmony, you avoid tension, you don't want to be seen as difficult, so you smooth things over, you hold back. You give the benefit of the doubt, even when something doesn't sit right. At first, it feels like emotional maturity, like you're doing the right thing. But over time, something shifts. You start feeling invisible, unappreciated, slightly taken for granted. And you can't quite explain why, because on paper, you're being a good guy. Here's the controversial truth. When you're always available, your presence loses weight. Being too nice often means suppressing parts of yourself, your preferences, your limits, your edge. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, that it's easier this way. But inside, you feel smaller, less solid, less certain of where you stand. What makes this so frustrating is that nobody tells men there's a difference between kindness and self-erasure. Kindness comes from choice. Niceness often comes from fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. And when fear is running the show, your behavior stops reflecting who you are and starts reflecting what you're trying to avoid. Over time, this creates internal tension. You feel like you're giving more than you're getting, but you don't feel justified in speaking up. You feel drained, but you don't feel allowed to step back. You start questioning yourself instead of questioning the situation. And here's the part that really hits. When you don't value your own time, energy, and attention, other people subconsciously won't either. This isn't about becoming cold or distant. It's about understanding that your presence matters because it's not unlimited. When you're always accessible, always agreeable, always accommodating, you teach people that you don't have boundaries worth respecting. That takes a toll, mentally, emotionally, even physically. You feel worn down, less motivated, less grounded, like you're constantly adjusting yourself instead of standing firmly where you are. Reclaiming power here doesn't mean changing who you are, it means stopping the habit of overgiving. It means realizing that saying less can carry more weight, that pulling back isn't punishment, it's self-regulation. You're allowed to have limits, you're allowed to be unavailable, you're allowed to say no without explaining yourself into exhaustion. Those aren't acts of selfishness, they're acts of self-respect. The moment a man stops overextending himself, something clicks. His words land differently, his presence feels steadier, his energy shifts from seeking acceptance to embodying certainty. Being kind is a strength. Being endlessly available is not. Power returns when you stop shrinking yourself to stay comfortable and start honoring your own space. 4. Why emotional control matters more than emotional expression. Let's have an honest moment. No judgment, just clarity. A lot of men today confuse emotional expression with emotional strength. They believe that saying everything they feel, the moment they feel it, is the same as being emotionally healthy. It's not, and this misunderstanding quietly costs men their power. Here's the part that might sting a little. Reacting emotionally isn't depth, it's a lack of control. That doesn't mean emotions are bad, they're human, they're signals. But when emotions run the show instead of being managed, a man becomes unpredictable, to others and to himself. His mood dictates his decisions. His frustration chooses his words. His insecurity shapes his behavior. And that's not power. That's volatility. Some men lean too far in the other direction and shut everything down. Others overshare, overreact, or constantly seek to be understood. Different strategies, same outcome. Loss of grounding. Emotional control isn't about suppression, and it's not about dumping everything out. It's about regulation. Here's where the criticism comes in, and it's said with respect. If every emotion you feel immediately becomes something you act on or voice, you're not leading yourself. You're being led. Strong men don't deny their emotions. But they don't let emotions steer the wheel either. They pause, they observe, they choose how and when to respond. That pause is where authority lives. What emotional control really looks like is restraint without repression. It's knowing you're upset, but not letting that upset define the moment. It's feeling pressure without folding under it. It's being aware without being reactive. And let's be clear, this isn't about being stoic for appearances, it's about self-mastery. When a man lacks emotional control, his presence feels unstable. People don't know what version of him they're going to get. That unpredictability erodes trust, respect, and influence. On the other hand, when a man stays calm under pressure, his words carry more weight, even when he says less. Here's the wake-up call. Emotional discipline is not optional if you want power. If you constantly feel misunderstood, overlooked, or dismissed, it's worth asking whether you're expressing too much without grounding it in clarity. Expression without control often sounds like noise. Control gives expression meaning. The advice is simple, but not easy. Slow down your responses. You don't need to react immediately. You don't need to prove how you feel in real time. You don't need emotional release to validate your experience. Take space. Let emotions settle. Decide how you want to show up before you show up. That decision-making process builds internal authority. It tells your nervous system that you're in charge. Over time, that calm becomes natural. You feel steadier, more centered, less pulled around by circumstances. Emotional control doesn't make you distant. It makes you dependable. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you solid. Men don't regain power by expressing more. They regain it by mastering what they feel, choosing their responses, and showing up with calm intent. That's not suppression, that's strength. 5. Choosing yourself first, without becoming bitter or angry. Let's slow this down for a second because this is where a lot of men get it wrong. Choosing yourself does not mean becoming cold, hostile, or resentful. Yet many men swing to that extreme because they think power only comes from hardness. It doesn't. Real power comes from clarity. Here's the truth most men need to hear. If choosing yourself makes you angry, you haven't actually chosen yourself yet. Anger usually shows up when boundaries come too late, when you've ignored your needs for too long, when you've overgiven, overextended, and stayed silent, then suddenly decide you're done. That explosion isn't strength, it's backlog. Choosing yourself early feels calm. Choosing yourself late feels aggressive. A grounded man doesn't need to announce his independence. He doesn't need to punish anyone with distance or silence. He simply adjusts his behavior to match his values. He steps back when something doesn't align. He steps forward when it does. No drama required. This is where maturity comes in. Many men secretly expect that once they start choosing themselves, the world should immediately reward them. More respect, more appreciation, more recognition. And when that doesn't happen right away, bitterness creeps in. But choosing yourself isn't a strategy to control outcomes. It's a commitment to self-respect. When you choose yourself properly, you stop keeping score. You stop waiting for validation. You stop needing people to notice your sacrifice because you're no longer sacrificing yourself in the first place. That's freedom. Choosing yourself means listening when something feels off and responding quietly. It means walking away without resentment. It means saying less, not more. It means trusting that you don't need to prove why your standards exist. And yes, that can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to being accommodating, especially if you've tied your identity to being needed or appreciated. But discomfort isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're doing something new. Here's the key difference between power and bitterness. Bitterness says, I gave too much and got nothing back. Power says, I no longer give what costs me my peace. One is reactive, the other is deliberate. A man who chooses himself doesn't close his heart, he protects his energy. He doesn't become detached, he becomes selective. He doesn't resent the past, he learns from it. And over time, something subtle but powerful happens. Your presence becomes calmer. Your decisions become cleaner. You stop feeling pulled in different directions because you're finally anchored in your own standards. This is what taking your power back really looks like. Not anger, not dominance, not withdrawal, just quiet self-respect. When you choose yourself without bitterness, you don't need to demand respect. You naturally command it. And more importantly, you regain respect for yourself. That's the kind of power no one can take away. Let me leave you with one statement that's going to make some people uncomfortable, and that's intentional. Most men don't lack power because someone took it from them. They lack power because they keep giving it away and calling it maturity. That idea alone challenges everything men are praised for: being agreeable, being endlessly patient, being available, being understanding at all costs. And yet, so many men quietly feel empty, frustrated, or disconnected from themselves while doing all the right things. Here's the controversial truth: no one is coming to hand your power back to you. Not society, not relationships, not validation, not approval. Power only returns when a man decides to stop betraying himself in small daily moments. This isn't about blaming anyone, it's about responsibility. If something in this video stirred discomfort, that's not a sign to shut down. It's a sign you're paying attention. Growth rarely feels comfortable at first. It feels confronting. It feels exposing. It feels like realizing you've been living slightly out of alignment and pretending it didn't matter. But it does matter. Your time matters, your energy matters, your boundaries matter, your standards matter, and the moment you stop apologizing for having them, your entire presence changes. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop needing permission to be solid in who you are. Here's the real shift. When you stop trying to be chosen, you finally choose yourself. And that decision, made calmly, consistently, without anger, is what separates men who feel grounded from men who feel lost. If any part of this resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Comment your experiences. What hit, what challenged you, or where you felt yourself giving too much away. I read them, and when I can, I reach out. This isn't just content, it's a conversation. You're not alone in this, even if it's felt that way. This channel isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before you started shrinking yourself to fit expectations that never truly served you. Power doesn't come from force, it comes from alignment. And once you stop abandoning yourself, you'll realize something important. You were never powerless. You were just disconnected. That changes today.